building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today on our program, San Francisco will take a step tonight toward becoming the 4th city in California to apologize to Chinese Americans for how it treated the community historically. A few local students came up with the idea, and we'll chat with 2 of them coming up. Also, if you've filled up your tank lately, you've seen prices are at or above the all-time high in many places. What's driving this pain at the pump, and what can make it better? But first, major COVID news on the booster and on a new surge in cases. Joining us now to talk about the latest developments is Dr. George Rutherford, an epidemiologist at UCSF. Dr. Rutherford, great to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to see you too, Kristen.
Let's start with the big news with Pfizer today asking the FDA to approve boosters for all adults, so 18 and up, without restrictions. Right now, of course, people under 65 should or could get it only if they have a medical condition or somehow live or work in a higher risk setting. What do you think the thinking is here?
Just make the rules simpler so everybody understands them. So I know of people who are taking care of family members who are severely immunosuppressed and are, really at high risk of COVID, but they can't get the vaccine because they don't necessarily fall into one of these categories. That's just an example, but I think makes sense to, I like the idea of going forward with this. It really simplifies everything for people to just say, if you got a Pfizer vaccine, you should get a booster. If you got a Moderna vaccine, assuming that they'll go forward with this as well, you should get a booster. We've already said anybody who got J&J should get a booster. And the greater parallelism we can create between these 3 vaccines, among these 3 vaccines, the better the effect will be.
All right. Well, I can see the benefit in simplicity, but is the booster really necessary for healthy people, in that broad 18 to 64 age group?
Sure. Well, if it really were a zero-sum game, and if you didn't get a vaccine, you knew that it was going to Zambia, that would be a consideration. But we really don't have those considerations. And so the question is, do you want to get the vaccine or do you want to throw it away? I think with that kind of calculus, that most people would opt to get the booster dose, provide additional immunity out into the future, get away from this problem of breakthrough cases and cases among vaccinated people. And it'll help us move forward more rapidly. So I'm frankly in favor of it.
Okay. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing you say, look, there's going to be an upside for some people, many people perhaps, and downside for nobody in terms of, getting the boosters. So why not?
That's a fair formulation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. So let's give some examples so people can consider whether this is them or if it's similar to them. Would you get the booster, say, if you were 30, perfectly healthy, you work in tech, maybe half from home, half from an office?
Depends on what I do with the rest of my time when I'm not working in tech, which probably is sleep. But, knowing the work schedules people keep. But, I would certainly consider it, especially if I'm, out and about going to clubs and doing stuff socially at night. We see a lot of transmission in that age group, and especially in San Francisco. And so I would probably tend to fall on the be more cautious side of that equation.
Okay, what if you're, say, 50 and you work in retail or you drive a minibus?
Well, if you drive a minibus, you're on the list right now today.
Oh, okay, true. That's because you work for the city of San Francisco, which does mandate.
Well, or your transportation workers are on the list.
Okay, I mean like a forward-facing or customer-facing position, right?
I think if you're customer-facing, I think especially if you're 50 and if you had a little bit of chronic disease.
Yeah.
Which everybody at 50 does to a certain extent. Yeah, I certainly would.
Okay.
I don't think there's a lot of reason parsing this out at this point in time. There is until we get this approved, and then I think we can go forward pretty easily.
Well, there are some folks, though, who aren't convinced that there is no downside. There are people who are concerned about side effects, and there are others who are concerned with other things. So what would you say to those folks?
Well, if they've had 2 vaccines already, I assume they know they have they're pretty much accepted what they're getting into. This is sort of a belt and suspenders approach to assure that you have high levels of immunity and that you can get out of a winter surge, of an impending winter surge, without getting infected. Believe me, you don't want to get infected with this. Even if you had a couple of doses of vaccine, it's a miserable disease.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about
if you
immunity.
get a big dose, and it's trouble.
You brought up immunity, so I do want to ask you about that, because when the Biden administration first announced the booster plan, I think back in July, I remember Dr. Fauci and Walensky presenting slides that showed declining antibodies maybe 6-8 months after the original vaccine shots. Have we since learned more about whether that actually translates into waning immunity in real life?
It does. It does. And we have quite detailed studies that have figured this out, not only from Israel, which is where those original data came from, but now from the VA system, from Pfizer, from other large healthcare organizations. And we can really track this over time. And yeah, especially with the Pfizer, immunity wanes. The J&J wasn't kind of as robust as the other two to start with, and it remains not as robust as the other two now 6 months out. Moderna probably has the best performance, but it has some signs of waning immunity as well.
What's going to make a bigger difference for us as a whole when you talk about the society, the nation, if you will, giving people boosters, getting the 5 to 11-year-olds, vaccinated as soon as possible, or getting new adult vaccinations?
The answer to that question is yes. Those all are really important. Now, if you think you can get people who haven't been vaccinated to date vaccinated, good for you. Let's go for it. But, if you sort of assume that we're done with them, we're not going to be able to push on that, move that needle much more, except maybe with compulsory workplace vaccination as OSHA has proposed. I think we really have to concentrate first on getting people boosted and then on the 5 to 11-year-olds.
If we get a third of the 5 to 11-year-olds, and I'm going with that figure because that's what parents, said in recent polls, like in terms of jumping out immediately to get the vaccine, and then you get, let's say, I don't know, 50%, 70% of the people who already got the vaccine get a booster, where would that put us percentage-wise? Does that get us to the, I don't want to use herd immunity, but, the kind of elusive, we're good now place?
It gets us close. And the 30%, parents who want nothing to do with the vaccine, who are going to be early adopters or absolutely never get the vaccine for their 5 to 11-year-olds. That's from a national survey. I think in the Bay Area, the percentage that's going to go out and get it is going to be much higher. Yeah. I can tell you, my 11-year-old granddaughter sent me a picture of her getting vaccinated today. So, I'm down with it.
That's exciting for you, especially before Thanksgiving, right? Okay, let's talk about the Bay Area, because our counties, going by some metrics, seem to be going in the wrong direction, right? Most are back in the CDC's orange or red tier. We were in yellow before. Why? What's happened?
Well, it's, to start with, we're seeing the start of potentially a winter surge. Now, it would be nice if this is all kind of goes away and we don't really move the needle very much. But I can tell you in statewide, the numbers are being driven by, we're about 6,000 plus cases a day. Those are being driven largely by urban Southern California, with 1,300 cases a day from Los Angeles and, almost 1,000 a day from Riverside and San Bernardino, and then fewer from Orange and San Diego. That's where that's where a lot of the cases are coming from. But additionally, we're seeing cases in the large Central Valley counties, Kern, Fresno, Tulare, Stanislaus. That drives a lot of the transmission as well.
But even in the Bay Area, though, right? Aren't our numbers like 20% higher than where they were 2 weeks ago?
Not really.
Okay.
No, it's up and down. It's sort of
Statewide.
up and down. There's some places it's up and some places it's down. It balances out.
Okay. But can I just ask you, is it time, though, to stop looking at case numbers, you think? Rather look at hospitalizations, especially in areas where vaccination rates are high, such as in the Bay Area, to kind of give us a true indicator of how good of a shape or how bad of a shape we're in?
Well, we look at those numbers every day anyway. So it's not, people are getting used to seeing case numbers. But yeah, I think hospitalizations are equally important. And obviously, when you look at the metrics that the health officers put forward to stopping indoor mask mandates, one was about case levels, one was about levels of hospital capacity, and the other is about levels of vaccination. Those are all three are important. And I think you need to continue to look at all three of them.
All right, Dr. George Rutherford, great to see you, great to talk with you. And the takeaway is get the booster. Not going to hurt you.
Get your shot.
Can only help.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Take care. Talk to you
Take care.
soon.
Bye-bye.
What's going on with gas prices? That's probably something you're wondering about. We'll dig into that next. All right. I'm not sure if our producer put out a commercial break question. Oh, we did. Okay. So what is your biggest concern regarding COVID-19 right now? If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to answer that, and I'll share some of your responses in my own coming up. All right, Rochelle, I see your question or concern about whether it's safe to gather for Thanksgiving if everyone is vaccinated, but the kids might have just had one vaccine. I am not a doctor, but most doctors I talk to, I think, would think that is okay. All right. Welcome back. Gas prices continue to climb in Northern California to record heights in some cities. Check out the latest prices via AAA. These are average gas prices today for a gallon of regular. Ooh, Sonoma, you're at $4.83. Napa, about the same there. Let's check out Marin, $4.85. San Francisco, $4.87. Congratulations, highest in the Bay Area. Not a contest you want to win. So joining us now to talk about what's driving these prices and what it'll take to bring them back down is Patrick DeHaan, the head of petroleum analysis for Gas Buddy. Patrick, thanks a lot for your insight today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, help us put these prices in perspective. They really are rising very quickly, aren't they? I don't remember a summer surge, and certainly last year, a year ago during the pandemic, they were very low.
Yeah, exactly right. And during the summer, they at least held relatively stable, and that was because the Delta variant was kind of keeping things in check. But as you point out, really since the end of the summer around Labor Day, things have really started to escalate. And a lot of the reason for that is some energy issues that have developed overseas, an energy crisis, if you will, in areas of China where coal inventories are at record low levels. As a result, China is buying up as much natural gas, coal, and crude oil as it can to replace some of that loss. And in Europe, there's been a natural gas shortage as well, and that can also be replaced by crude oil. So essentially here, we have an incredible rise in demand over the last couple of weeks, but that is not met by an increase in supply. So oil prices have been pulled higher on this energy crunch, and that's why we're paying more at the pump today.
I also read something about our recent storms having a little impact as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We did see some refinery kinks as a result of the deluge and rain that we had a couple of weeks ago, some of those in the Bay Area. Just enough of an interruption to cause wholesale gas prices in Northern California to spike up a bit. But we may see a little bit of relief there in the weeks ahead. Those refineries now back online. But for now, the Bay Area, an average of $4.83 a gallon. I guess the only good news is that in the last week, it's only up a penny. So those increases are starting to throttle back.
All right. But as you know, you mentioned people being back on the roads, and that's only going to increase as we head into Thanksgiving and Christmas. So don't you think those will drive the prices up even further in the next month?
Well, what we tend to see is temperatures cool off, maybe not so much in California, while maybe Northern California, that's the country, is that gasoline demand seasonally does start to decline. And that should offset a temporary increase in gasoline consumption as Americans hit the road for that Thanksgiving Day travel. So, all in all, demand is still slowly cooling off. Now, keep in mind, the pandemic, there's still aspects of demand that's picking back up, more commutes back into work. But all in all, gasoline consumption not likely to really surge as much as we progress towards the holiday.
All right, so can I ask you, what is your forecast then as to when we'll really start to see the downturn in prices, and, you know, maybe kind of a short-term forecast and then a longer term?
Well, I think short-term forecast, we may see the inch up that I had described. It's slowing down, and eventually I think the Bay Area will start to see prices decline. It's not going to be much. It's going to be a few cents here and there. It's going to be the average that goes down, and that could happen just in time for Thanksgiving. Prices should be a few cents lower by then. More meaningful relief probably will not come until some point in earlier mid-2022. By that time, I'm hopeful that an increase in oil production that's happening will be enough to offset the rise in demand.
All right. Hey, a lot of people feel like these are all-time highs, but are they? How do they compare historically to, say, 2012, when I remember there was a huge jump in prices?
Yeah, that's right. Back in 2012, it was the Chevron refinery fire in Richmond that caused prices to go up to record highs. But we have now beaten those statewide and the Bay Area, not quite all the way down to the southern half of the state. LA is getting close, San Diego is getting close, but yes, in the Bay Area, you've beaten those by close to 10 cents a gallon now. So unfortunately, the distinction in the Bay Area of never having paid this much for an average gallon of gasoline.
Other than the natural ebb and flow and supply and demand kind of taking care of itself, are there things the U.S. or California governments can do now to relieve the situation?
Well, I think certainly there's a lot that California can do. It has some of the nation's highest gasoline prices, and that's a result of several things: unique regulations, high level of taxes, carbon management programs. But of course, to enact those or to roll those back and roll prices back, it would mean having to go back to no carbon pricing. So those are things that the state probably won't do, but there are things that California could do. Now, there's also things that the nation can do. Of course, President Biden's talked about releasing crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but that may only be temporary relief. I think for now, because this is a global phenomenon, not just a U.S. one, we're just going to have to wait until the supply and demand balance comes back closer into par.
Yeah, and taking that step, it would have to be something really drastic. So we'll see if we get to that point. We have about 20 seconds, but I want to ask you if you think a price surge like this could convince more new car buyers to get electric.
Oh, I certainly think so. You know, the higher prices go, the more of a decision it is, the easier decision it is for new car buyers to go that route. So I certainly think, especially in California, with that distinction of the highest prices in the country, that will be something that will probably happen as prices remain high.
All right, Patrick DeHaan, head of petroleum analysis for Gas Buddy. Thank you so much for your time today. Take care.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, we'll talk to a couple local students behind the new effort for San Francisco to apologize to Chinese Americans for historical wrongs. Those details coming up next.
In commercial break.
All right, everybody. How's it going? Hope you enjoyed learning about why gas prices are so high, some of the key factors. Boy, I gassed up yesterday, and it was like $5.20 or something crazy like that for premium. And granted, it was a gas station close to the freeway, so I think it was even higher, slight gouging there. But look at these prices. I'm going to take a sip of water as my trusty producer scrolls through your county to see what you're paying on average. Today, San Francisco is making a move to formally apologize to Chinese Americans for the many ways the city has mistreated the community. Supervisor Matt Haney is introducing a resolution. If passed, it will make it San Francisco the fourth Bay Area city, actually make that fourth California city, to publicly right historical wrongs.
It absolutely has to be more than symbolism. There's meaning in an apology. There is meaning in an acknowledgement. There's meaning in people knowing this history, because it will build understanding and solidarity. And that alone is powerful, but it's not enough. We have to go a step further. If we're gonna confront the violence that we saw towards Asian and Chinese residents over the last year and a half, the shocking rise in violence, we have to confront this history.
And that's Supervisor Haney just now. This all began after 3 students had a conversation with him. 2 of those teens behind this effort joining us now, Drew Min and Dennis Wu. Dennis being the chair of SF Cause, which stands for San Francisco Community Alliance for Unity, Safety, and Education. Thank you both so much. And you are not teens. I just made you sound younger, which if you did that to me, I would not object. No, congratulations.
Well, I wouldn't object either.
You wouldn't object, right? Right? Okay.
Well, I went through stem cell transplant about 7 years ago. So
well, it was highly
UCSF
effective.
doctors would tell you I'm only 7 years old.
All right. How about a quick introduction to our viewers? And really, I would like to hear from both of you how this got started. Why don't we start with you, Dennis?
Well, it all started with my reading about what happened at Antioch, the apology at Antioch. And when that happened, I mentioned it to George Tilton Lowe, and said, or George Lowe Tilton, and said, George, yeah, a few years ago, he did a paper when he was in high school, and he's a sophomore now at Stanford. I said, George, you did something about some of these atrocities in Chinatown. How would you like to do more follow-up on this? And then, so he got involved with it with my son, Dennis Casey, who's a senior at Lowell. And so they started researching, and they came up with a lot of the findings. And so Drew learned about it, and he was we were at a luncheon with Supervisor Matt Haney, and I guess Drew said something to the supervisor, and that's how the thing has evolved.
All right, Drew, tell us about, was Supervisor Haney immediately responsive?
It was quite immediate. I think Dennis here is doing, well, I serve as executive director for SF Cause, but I think Dennis here is doing himself a disservice when a lot of this was, he was the fuel behind this idea. It just so happened that we were thinking about it, and we saw Supervisor Haney at a luncheon. Mm-hmm. We talked about presenting this to the board. He was already there, so we thought, well, this is perfect. Why not approach him? And the supervisor was very shocked, as all of us, that this apology was never issued before in the 150 years. But he was very responsive.
All right, look, we know as laborers, farmers, railroad workers immigrated to California from China during the gold rush, there were many discriminatory laws passed on the national and state levels, right? There were laws to prevent Asians from entering, yes, from becoming citizens, from bringing wives over, from owning property here, from living in certain places, from working in many categories of jobs. The list goes on and on. But give us some concrete examples of what San Francisco did, what actions or, laws San Francisco passed. Who wants to take it?
So, Drew, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can take that. So we can, if you give me the whole day, I can go with you and we can cover maybe half of the things that happened. But just for a specific example, not a lot of people know this, but the reason why Chinatown, SF Chinatown is in the location it is today is because Chinese Americans were restricted by the board at the time, by the board of supervisors at the time, to not be able to work or live outside those parameters. And so what happened was that area at the time had factories, which there was a lot of pollution, and it had a lot of butchery shops. And of course, the FDA didn't exist at the time, so there was a lot of contamination. There was a lot of unsanitary environments. And so that's one thing that happened to the Chinese Americans in San Francisco. And you will notice that Chinatown looks it feels like its own pocket. It feels like its own pocket because it was segregated from the rest of the city and cut off from city services. That's just one thing. I think one other perfect example is the Chinese Americans did not go into integrated schools. And so for a long time, there was a Chinese American segregated school, and that eventually got shut down for 15 years, meaning there was no way of education for Chinese American children until the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, to which, as a response, instead of putting the Chinese American students with the integrated schools, they reopened the segregated school just so that they didn't have to integrate them again.
Look, we only have about 30 seconds left on air, but Dennis, I'm going to let you finish this. Why is a formal apology important? And is it just an I'm sorry, or is there a call to action or promise of action?
I think it's all of that. I think that we have to recognize what's happened in the past before we can move forward. And I think it's, hate is a very, very terrible, terrible virus. Hate has affected all of us in our city. It's affected the Blacks, it's affected Latinos, it's affected the LGBT community, and it has certainly affected the Asian American community with over 9,000 attacks that have occurred since Trump called COVID-19
Dennis,
the China virus.
Let's go ahead and finish this conversation over on Facebook Live. Take a short break on the air. Yes, you're right. You were talking, I'm sorry, before we went to break. We have about a couple minutes to finish here on Facebook Live and YouTube. You were talking about how recently there have been a lot of attacks on Asian Americans. And I wonder if you look at the historical context and what's happening now, and whether you think this apology is a step towards putting us on the right path.
Well, I think the apology is very, very important as putting us on the right track. I think that we need to understand our past. We need to recognize our past so we don't repeat it, so that we can move forward and work together in unity in this community. Because as I was saying earlier, hate and attacks have happened to all of us. I can remember when the LGBT community, the gay community, was criticized and attacked for what we now know as AIDS. And this happened to the Chinese way back when the bubonic plague happened. And people were saying that that was a virus that only affected the Chinese. And so it's time that we recognize that these diseases, these viruses, do not discriminate. It affects all of us, and so does hate, and so does evil. And we really need to start working together as a community, working together in unity.
Drew, what was SF Cause's role in helping shape this resolution?
Well, all of this was done under the pretense of SF Cause. SF Cause is a 501c3 focused on civil advocacy.
Okay.
And so it was only appropriate that our organization took on the role of championing this idea. And a lot of it, of course, was Dennis Wu here. His vision for it was the fuel behind the idea.
All right. Well, Drew, Dennis, we're out of time. Thank you both. Dennis, not a teenager, but clearly young at heart, fighting with a lot of passion for important topics and issues. Thank you both. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Among the topics, surging gas prices and the push to get boosters for everyone ages 18 and up. We'll see you back here at 4. Bye-bye.